Q-Bert was one of the most popular arcade games of the early 80s. It had its own cartoon show on CBS as part of the Saturday Supercade, and was ported to just about every console that ever existed. While almost everyone's played or at least heard about Q-Bert, not many know that this arcade classic had a sequel called Q-Bert's Qubes. It was originally an arcade game back in 1983, but here we're going to talk about the Atari 2600 port. In the original Q-Bert game for the system, you guided him around, attempting to change the colors of whatever platform he landed on. The objective was to make all the colors on the stage the same, which would complete the round. Here, the gameplay is largely the same, except this time it has a 3D element, because when Q-Bert jumps off of a cube, it rotates with him. In the arcade version of the game, the cubes actually look like they're spinning, but in the 2600 version, it looks more like they're just flashing. It's no surprise that the game would be graphically inferior to the arcade, but it's so different that it negatively affects the gameplay. So there's a cube in the upper left corner of the screen. What you're supposed to do is, you're supposed to match 4 cubes to the color of that cube. This is considerably harder than the original version of Q-Bert because instead of just having to change the color of a single platform, here you have to match the sides of an entire cube. It's sort of like trying to figure out a Rubik's Cube, which also happens to be an Atari 2600 game, but that's besides the point. Yes, unlike the original Q-Bert, this game really forces you to think. So while matching cubes is more rewarding here, it'll also serve to piss you off 10 times more when an enemy messes you up. Here's the confusing thing that I didn't understand the first time I played the game. Yes, while you're playing, you have to try to get the sides of the cube to match the target block, but when you actually get a match, it'll be indicated by turning the entire cube a solid green. So in a way, your goal is actually to get a row of 4 solid green colored blocks. It's weird and it's hard to get the hang of, but with enough practice, it can be done. Doing all that is hard enough, but don't forget that there are enemies coming after you the whole time too, and they're relentless. There's purple balls that come down to squash Q-Bert flat, and when they reach the bottom, they hatch into an evil mouse. These guys are the worst because they trail Q-Bert around like a heat-seeking missile. However, not all hope is lost because you can get rid of them by getting them to land on a rotating cube. The most frequent enemies are the ones that melt into the platforms if it's the same color that they are. They're just annoying because they continually keep coming. Another thing that makes this harder than the original Q-Bert on the 2600 is that you can't pass through enemies while jumping. Before, when you'd leap off a platform, if an enemy was coming in your direction, you could just pass right through them. Now, there's no mercy. You touch an enemy in the air, you're dead. There's green balls that'll freeze all the enemies on the screen momentarily, which is definitely helpful, and touching a turtle will slow enemies down. My strategy in this game is to try to match the rows more towards the bottom first, because the enemies come from the top of the screen. That way, it gives you a little extra time to figure out the cubes. There's also difficulty settings. On the easier setting, completed solid green cubes never flip, and on the hard setting, Q-Bert can make the completed cubes tumble. This game was also released on the ColecoVision, and it's a far superior port compared to the 2600 version. Here, you can actually tell what you're looking at as the cubes really look like they're spinning. It's a much closer match to the arcade. But if I was going to recommend any console version of Q-Bert, I'd recommend Q-Bert 3 on Super Nintendo. This one almost made my list for top 10 obscure SNES gems because I don't often hear anybody talking about it. One of the big complaints I hear about the 2600 version of Q-Bert are the controls. A lot of people have trouble with the way the directions work. But in Q-Bert 3, they give you several different options for controlling Q-Bert with the D-pad, which definitely makes it more user-friendly for anybody to play. Now, obviously the graphics are far superior, and the new backgrounds give it a lot more personality. The only thing I really don't like about this is that it can be hard to tell which platform to jump off of to land on the spinning discs, because the alignment is kinda wonky. Other than that though, it's a great game. If Q-Bert 3 isn't in your Super Nintendo collection, you're really missing out. But getting back to Q-Bert's Qubes for the Atari 2600, sadly, I don't think it's worth owning other than for collecting purposes. Besides that, it's rare, so it's definitely not worth the money. If you want to play Q-Bert's Qubes on a home console, I'd say go for the Coleco version.